Hello. In this last nucleus, as it was announced, we will do a kind of summary of the journey we've done, which will result in the last and final question. Therefore, a question of personal reflection. What does this Salesian spirituality mean for the reality in which I am working? I want to add a note before we begin. The first nucleus, in which we explained what spirituality is not considered in this synthesis, because it was a hermeneutic, methodological question about the concept of spirituality. During the 18th century, Italy underwent profound political, social, and religious changes. The French Revolution, the rise of the liberalism, and the birth of the unified Italian state brought about a progressive separation of church and state, marginalizing the ecclesiastical presence in society and public life. The church reacted with a certain rigidity, stiffening around a defensive, highly normative and control-centered pastoral model. In this climate, Don Bosco was able to distinguish himself by proposing a complete different way, centered on a joyful, participatory education based on a mutual trust. He did not respond to the crisis with a rejection of the world, but with a full and creative engagement in reality. In the heart of the 19th century Turin, increasingly marked by urbanization and abundant youth, Don Bosco sensed that the poor young people, migrants from the countryside, were the first victims of a system that excluded them. Without moral, spiritual, and material support, they were in danger of being lost. Thus, the oratory was born, not just a physical place, but a living space where young people could find a home, church, courtyard, and school. It was in this context that the famous preventive system was developed, a revolutionary educational method for the time, based on reason, religion, and loving kindness. Contrary to the prevailing repressive model, the preventive method aimed to prevent evil through a friendly presence, dialogue, trust, and enchantment of the young people's potential. But Don Bosco did not come to these insights alone. He was deeply inspired by some great figures of Christian spirituality, who formed his educational and pastoral vision. First among them was Saint Francis de Sales, whose gentleness, balance, and conviction Don Bosco admired. Francis de Sales taught that holiness was a concrete possibility for everyone. From him he inherited the heart of his method, loving kindness as the way to the young person's heart. Don Bosco was convinced, like Francis de Sales, that you attract more with a drop of honey than with a barrel of vinegar. Another key figure was Saint Ignatius of Loyola. The spiritual exercises and the method of discernment were important tools for Don Bosco, learned during his formation at the ecclesiastical convent in Turin. The idea of finding God in all things, the importance of mission, and the focus on personal accompaniment profoundly shaped his educational and spiritual style. Instead, Saint Alphonsus Maria de Liguori was the reference for a pastoral moral theology capable of reconciling truth with mercy. Alfonso spoke to the people in simple words, exhorting trust in God and in confession as a liberating encounter and not a judgment. Don Bosco took up this approach and made it central in the oratory. Frequent confession, friendship with priests, simple and joyful prayer were for him instruments of salvation. Saint Philip Neri also had a great influence. His joyful style, playing music, and the education that comes from friendship and closeness are elements that Don Bosco made his own in the Oratorian model. Just as decisive was the figure of Saint Joseph Cafasso, the spiritual director and guide in the first steps of his priestly ministry. Cafasso helped him to discern his vocation among the poor and abandoned youth, encouraged him in difficult times, and supported him in the concrete construction of the Salesian works. It was also thanks to Cafasso's trust that Don Bosco was able to purchase the first premises for the oratory. But the real breakthrough that Don Bosco made concrete in his mission was the proposal that holiness is for everyone. This insight, which Francis de Sales had already boldly affirmed in the 17th century, was taken up by Don Bosco and adapted to the daily lives of the boys. Don Bosco told his youngsters that holiness consists in always being cheerful and doing one's duty well. An accessible, concrete, credible message. Examples such as Domenico Savio, Michael Magone, and Francis Bezuco were living proof that a young man can be a saint by remaining in his everyday life between school, play, and prayer. This vision was later officially embraced by the Church in the Second Vatican Council, which in Lumen Gentium, chapter 5, proclaimed the universal call to holiness. Every baptized person, lay or consecrated, is called to live a fully God-oriented existence. Popes such as Pius IX, Pius XI, Paul VI, John Paul II, Benedict, and Pope Francis have revived this message, expressively citing Francis de Sales as a forerunner. Pope Francis, in his exhortation Gaudete et Exsultate, reminds us that holiness is lived by lovingly doing the ordinary things of life. Don Bosco translated all this into an integral educational and spiritual project. He knew how to build an environment in which the young people feels welcome, valued and accompanied on his journey. He knew how to speak of God not with imposition, but with affection. And he created an educational community in which educators and young people walk together towards holiness. Don Bosco was a prophet of his time and a teacher of ours. He was able to read the challenges of modernity with the eyes of hope. He gathered the best of the spiritual tradition and made it accessible to the simplest young people. He believed that every boy, if loved and accompanied, can come and can become a good Christian and an upright citizen. His teaching still remains valid and relevant today. To educate is an act of love, and love always opens the door to holiness. His legacy teaches us today that educating means loving, accompanying, and believing in the possibility of goodness in every young person. Don Bosco was a brilliant educator because he was able to propose a high ideal, holiness, to young people without making it unattainable. Through the biographies of Dominic Savio, Michele Magone, and Francesco Besuco, Don Bosco does not simply recount exemplary lives. He builds concrete educational models. These boys were not saints because they performed miracles, but because they lived everyday things well, with cheerfulness, study, and piety. Fundamental to this all is accompaniment. Don Bosco deeply believed that every young person needed to be accompanied in the discernment of his or her choices. And he did this with a very particular style of education, never imposing but proposing, never judging but encouraging, never directing from above but walking alongside. The educator, according to Bosco, is the one who gains the young person's heart, knows him, loves him, and freely directs him toward the good, toward holiness. Not everyone, however, in Don Bosco narratives succeeds in this journey. The stories of Peter, Valentine, and Severino shows the difficulties of a young person, the difficulties he can encounter when a favorable educational environment is lacking, when parents are unsupportive, when society poses models contrary to the faith. Don Bosco also draws an important lesson from these stories. Education is a community work, involving educators, family, peers, and priests. No one grows alone. Today, however, we are in a different time. Young people do not wake up at night wondering how to become saints. We live in a secularized society where faith is no longer the starting point. But this is not a bad thing. It is a challenge. Secularization, as Benedict XVI said, frees us from religious automatism and invites us to a more personal and conscious faith. Don Bosco also offers us a valuable key of interpretation here, the dream of the mountain. In the dream, he leads the boys to the summit, but he arrives alone. Then he changes strategy. He no longer puts himself in front, but walks among them, talking to each one. Only in this way does everybody reach the top. The dream teaches us that holiness cannot be imposed from above, but is born when we walk alongside young people, starting from where they are, not where we would like them to be. Holiness today is not a point of arrival, but a path to be traveled together, made up of free choices, true relationship, and small daily steps. Don Bosco still repeats it to us today. Holiness is possible if it is lived with joy, freedom, and accompaniment. Through Nucleus 7 and Nucleus 8, we discovered how this spirituality, rooted in Don Bosco's experience, is a call to holiness for Salesians themselves, lived out in daily life, education, and relationship with God and the young. Salesian spirituality is not ascetic or abstract, but simple, joyful, and concrete. As Francis de Ramo reminds us, it stems from Don Bosco's educational and pastoral experience. It is a spirituality that is embodied in daily work, relationships with young people, and trust in providence. The Salesian constitutions from the earliest draft guide us to the heart of this spirituality. The purpose of the Salesian Society is a Christian perfection of its members, achieved through the educational commitment to young people, especially the poorest. The method is that of Jesus. He began to do and then to teach. In fact, Salesian perfects himself in order to serve others, combining action and interiority. Father Egidio Vigano emphasizes that spirituality is the source of Salesian action. Without it, we risk becoming mere religious functionaries. Salesian life is a continuous listening to the Holy Spirit, who guides us as he guided Don Bosco. Father Vigano offers us a valuable synthesis referred to as the grace of unity, living everyday life as a theological place. Every gesture, even the simplest, can be an opportunity for holiness. The educational endeavor is not just work, but a way to sanctification, sanctifying ourselves by educating. The preventive system is not just a pedagogy, but a school of youthful holiness, based on reason, religion, and loving kindness. Being happy in doing good is the hallmark of the Salesian. Moreover, Salesian spirituality is communitarian. Don Bosco insisted on the importance of fraternity, calling the community the lung of Salesian work. It is here that faith is nourished through prayer, sacraments, and sharing. Mary, Help of Christians, is the mother and teacher of the Salesian path. Her entrustment is not just devotion, but a spiritual attitude that urges us to follow Christ with total abandonment. And precisely, Christ, the Good Shepherd, is the paradigm of our mission. Like Jesus, who had compassion with the crowd, the Salesian is moved by the young people, especially the most marginalized. Don Bosco lived his spirituality in a radical way. His every step, word and deed were geared to the salvation of the young. The letters from Don Pascual Chavez, Don Ángel Fernández Artime, invite us to renew this commitment. Contemplating Christ with Don Bosco's eyes. It is not enough to admire him, we must imitate him, living a Christification that configures us to him through love and young people. Like Don Bosco in Valdoco, we are called to reach out to the poorest young people, reading the signs of times with creativity and fidelity to the gospel. Salesian spirituality is a path of joy, dedication, and communion. It asks us to be instruments in God's hands, like Don Bosco, to be signs and bearers of God's love to young people. Don Angel says, let us look back with gratitude, live the present with passion, and dream of the future with courage, guided by the Spirit and the example of Mary. As you have perceived, in the environment of spirituality, in the way we have tried to delve into Salesian spirituality and the assignments I have given you, there are no true or false answers, especially because, as we have seen in the first nucleus, it is a personal experience. We try to show what had an influence on Don Bosco's spirituality and how he invented or shaped Salesian youth spirituality and the spirituality of the Salesians themselves. But for today, so much depends on one's own experience. And so we come to the title of this nucleus, and also to the small assignment I ask you to do. Therefore, what is Salesian spirituality according to you? I want to ask you to describe it in 15 lines, and so we can end our journey together.